Welcome to Reddit Saga. If you're a fan of heartfelt, real life stories, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss out. Thanks for being here. Let's dive into today's story.
It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind where the air feels heavier than usual and the silence in the house doesn't feel peaceful, it feels calculated. I remember the chill in my spine when I walked into my father's office, a place I used to associate with ambition, strategy, and those long nights we spent building something I thought belonged to both of us. I had the documents in my hand, freshly printed and notarized. Taking my name off the business was supposed to be symbolic, my quiet way of walking away from something that had already been stolen from me behind closed doors. But I didn't expect him to be there, waiting like a storm ready to break. The second he saw the envelope in my hand, his eyes narrowed, and his posture shifted. I knew that look. The same one he used to give clients when he wanted to dominate the negotiation room. Only this time, I was the opponent. "What the hell is that?" he barked, stepping out from behind his desk like a bear roused from hibernation. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I placed the envelope down, nice and slow, like I was defusing a bomb. "You're just going to throw everything away?" he growled. "After everything I've done for you?" My hands were trembling, but I forced my voice to stay even. "You didn't do it for me. You gave everything to him, Dad. You made me the co-founder on paper and gave my brother control behind my back. I'm just making it official now." That was when he lunged. It wasn't a stumble or a step forward in anger, it was a full-on, desperate surge of rage. The kind that only comes when someone realizes they're no longer in control. He grabbed for the envelope with one hand and reached toward my shoulder with the other, as if he could physically pull me back into submission. I stepped back fast, knocking over a chair. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor, but I didn't flinch. My heart was racing. I was scared, yes, but not surprised. I had seen this coming the moment I discovered the hidden amendments to the Articles of Incorporation. The moment I realized that my brother, who never showed up to a single investor meeting, who couldn't even balance his own checking account, had been quietly handed executive power through a backdated clause my father signed without telling me. The betrayal stung less than the insult. "Do you even understand what you're doing?" he snarled, still gripping the envelope like it was a grenade. "You're cutting yourself out of your future." I met his eyes. "No, I'm cutting myself out of your lie." He didn't hit me. That's important to say. But in that moment, it was as though he wanted to. The violence wasn't in his fists, it was in his silence afterward. The way he looked at me like I'd just broken something sacred. Like I had failed him, instead of the other way around. But I didn't back down. I let him stand there, fuming, seething, holding that paper like it was going to rewrite the last 2 years of deception. I waited until he sat down again, defeated, or maybe calculating, and then I turned and walked out. It took everything in me not to slam the door. Back in my car, I sat there gripping the wheel, my fingers aching from how tight I held on. I wasn't crying. I was breathing. Deep, measured breaths. Like I had to convince my body it was okay now. That it was over. But it wasn't. Taking my name off the business wasn't the end of the war. It was the beginning of it. Because now, he knew I knew. He knew I had proof. And more than that, he knew I wasn't going to play the silent daughter anymore. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about reclaiming something. For too long, I let myself believe that loyalty meant silence. That family meant forgiving without confrontation. That my role was to protect the image, even as they gutted my worth behind closed doors. But not anymore. As I pulled out of the driveway that morning, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. My dad was standing by the front window, watching. His arms were crossed, jaw tight, eyes burning a hole through the glass. He wasn't shocked that I'd left. He was shocked that I finally left on my terms. And I had a feeling that for a man like him, that was the deepest wound of all. Because he didn't lose a daughter that day. He lost his puppet. And I was just getting started. When I was a teenager, I used to believe that loyalty was something you earned through sweat. My dad was my hero, stern but brilliant. a man who built his empire from a basement office with just a phone and a cheap printer. He called it the grind. I called it legacy. I grew up thinking I'd inherit not just his business, but his fire. We were partners, even before we were legal ones. Every birthday card he gave me had a post-it note with a number. Your percentage in the future company. I took it seriously. I worked hard, studied finance, learned tax law, sat in on vendor calls, and traveled across the country to pitch ideas in his name. And when I turned 24, he made it official. I became a co-founder of the firm we'd been building. At least, that's what the papers said. What I didn't know was that the paperwork was a smokescreen. A PR story to sell the image of a modern father-daughter empire. Behind the scenes, he had already begun building something else, with my brother at the center of it. Now, my brother, Evan, was everything I wasn't. Charismatic, reckless, allergic to consistency. He floated between startup ideas and expensive hobbies like changing outfits. When we were kids, Dad used to sigh every time Evan crashed a toy drone or failed a math test, but he never held it against him. He called him a big idea guy. I, on the other hand, was the executor. I didn't complain. I thought we made a good team. But slowly, things started to shift. It began with small exclusions. Evan started attending meetings he wasn't invited to. He began speaking for the company in interviews. Then he started hiring his own people, consultants, designers, legal advisors, using our resources, our budget, without ever looping me in. I chalked it up to Dad giving him more responsibility. Maybe I was overreacting. Then came the first real punch. A client acquisition deal I'd spent 6 months structuring was handed off to Evan for presentation optics. He got the credit. I got silence. When I confronted Dad, he gave me a look I didn't recognize, like I was the emotional one, the liability. You care too much about the details, he said. Let your brother handle the front. It didn't sit right. But again I let it go. Because loyalty. Because family. Then I found the clause. It was buried deep in a stack of documents we'd sent to an investor. I was doing final reviews late at night, as I always did. I was used to fine print. That's when I spotted an amended ownership file, a revision of our operating agreement. The changes had been signed, stamped, and filed without my knowledge. My name was still listed publicly as co-founder, but legally, my voting rights had been transferred to Evan. Quietly. Months ago. I stared at the screen for an hour. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I understood it too well. This wasn't a mistake. It was planned. My father had legally maneuvered me out of control without ever saying a word. And Evan? He played dumb. When I confronted him, he smirked. It's just paperwork. You're still the face. Isn't that what matters to you? It was like being slapped with the truth. They didn't see me as a partner. I was the marketing token. The daughter in the press releases. The woman in finance they could parade to investors to look progressive. But it wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that I had spent my 20s building a kingdom that already had a crown prince. I was just the architect who never got to sit on the throne. After that, everything changed. I started documenting everything. Emails, contracts, calendar entries. I went through old call logs, found discrepancies in meeting times, confirmed that I was being deliberately excluded from decisions that impacted our assets. I even discovered payments made to Evan from accounts that should have required my signature, only they didn't, because my signing authority had been reassigned months ago. But still, I kept quiet. I needed time. I played the role. I showed up to work, smiled in meetings, clapped at Evan's presentations. I let them believe I was complacent, comfortable, even unaware. All while I rebuilt a version of the business in the shadows, one that didn't depend on my father's legacy or my brother's recklessness. I hired a legal team of my own. Quietly. A firm that specialized in ownership restructuring and exit strategies. I secured financial separation. I moved assets. Liquidated anything tied to my name but locked into their control. and I had them file the paperwork to remove me, formally and irrevocably, from the business. Not just as a co-owner, but as a silent witness. I wasn't walking away. I was burning the bridge behind me. And that led me to the Sunday morning that opened this chapter, the moment my father finally realized the grip he thought he had was gone. What he didn't know was that I wasn't just taking my name off the company. I was removing their power to use me as a shield. The news spread fast within the industry. Our investors were confused. Some were panicked. Reporters began asking questions. Why did she leave? What happened to the family empire image? My father tried damage control, but without me, the press didn't bite. Because I wasn't just a co-founder, I was the strategist, the closer, the credibility. And I had receipts. That week, a journalist I trusted published an exposé, not sensational, not angry, just the facts. The revision of documents. The ownership swap. The tax inconsistencies. The timeline. My silence wasn't cowardice, it was a chess move. And the checkmate had just landed. My father called me multiple times after that. I didn't answer. Evan tried to text, first smug, then defensive, then desperate. I archived them all. I had nothing more to say. Because everything that needed to be said was now public. They weren't just dealing with a family dispute. They were facing scrutiny, audits, potential lawsuits. And I was gone. But I wasn't done. I launched my own firm 2 months later. Small, agile, female-led, and entirely mine. Built not on legacy, but clarity. No nepotism. No secrets. Just talent and transparency. Investors I'd once brought into Dad's firm reached out. Clients followed. Quietly, then publicly. Because people notice integrity. Even when it takes time. And I noticed something else too, freedom. I could breathe. Make decisions without second-guessing someone else's agenda. Build without worrying about being erased in a backroom deal. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that moment, my dad's hand grabbing for the envelope, his face twisted with fury. Not because I hurt him. But because I slipped out of his control. Because I dared to say, I know what you did. And I won't let you do it again. People say blood is thicker than water. But I've learned that paper, signed, dated, filed, can be thicker than both. And in the world of business, what's legal is what's real. And now so am I. The day after the article dropped, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, DC area code, sharp and cold. It was the IRS. They weren't calling to congratulate me on walking away. They wanted to talk about irregularities in the company's structure, especially the inconsistencies that had been made public thanks to the exposé. For years, the firm had benefited from minority woman-owned business credits. I was the face they used for that, a convenient box to check while they rerouted control to my brother. When I withdrew and made everything public, that status evaporated overnight. What started as a scandal suddenly escalated into a compliance investigation. And not just from the IRS. Our biggest federal client pulled out pending review. That was a 7-figure contract. Gone. Meanwhile, I didn't say a word. It was strange how quickly silence turned into strategy. My phone lit up every day, reporters asking for comment, former colleagues acting concerned but mostly fishing for intel, even extended family trying to pull me into just a little talk. I said nothing. Because I knew the damage wasn't done by my voice. It was done by the paper trail I left behind, and the silence I kept long enough for it to matter. But the real turning point, the one that flipped the entire game, was the shareholder meeting. The firm was still technically a private company, but with multiple large investors, quarterly updates were mandatory. For years, I helped prep those decks, scripted the talking points. But this time, I wasn't presenting. I was attending, as a former co-founder who still owned the intellectual property they desperately needed. Because here's the thing, while Dad and Evan were busy moving around equity and power, they forgot one crucial piece. They left my name on the original patents. Every core algorithm, every process flow we built in the first 3 years, legally mine. They had used those assets without renewing licensing agreements. Why? Because they assumed I wouldn't walk away. That I wouldn't dare torch the kingdom I helped build. They underestimated me. Again. The meeting took place in a glass-walled conference center downtown, all high ceilings and polished stone. I showed up in a black suit and flat shoes, confident, grounded, unfazed. The room went silent when I walked in. Even Evan looked up from his phone, blinking like he'd seen a ghost. I took a seat in the back. I didn't need the head of the table anymore. I owned the narrative. The presentation began. Evan fumbled through numbers that didn't make sense. One investor raised their hand. What's the backup plan now that the minority-owned credit status is under review? Another one. Why weren't we informed of these ownership adjustments months ago? And then, are you currently being sued for IP infringement? That one hit like a grenade. Dad tried to deflect. Said it was being handled privately. But I had already done what they thought I wouldn't. I filed an injunction that very morning. A motion to bar the company from using the intellectual property registered under my name until a licensing agreement was renegotiated. Which meant their product line frozen. Their operations halted. That's when I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell. I simply stated the facts. 3 years ago, I co-authored every critical asset that your current platform still uses today. When I was removed from operational control, no licensing adjustments were made. My name was stripped from the board but not from the foundational code, architecture, and workflows. That's a breach. The room exploded. Not literally, but the tension could have shattered glass. Evan went pale. My father slammed his hand on the table. We built that together. I met his eyes. Exactly. Together. And then you sold it out from under me. From that moment, the meeting was over. Half the investors walked out before the final slide. The other half demanded immediate legal mediation. Within 48 hours, the firm's accounts were frozen pending review. Evan tried to spin it on social media, called me emotional, said I. Overreacted. He posted a black and white photo of our childhood with a caption about family being more important than money. It backfired. People dug up the exposé, the patents, my court filing. A thread with receipts went viral. Hundreds of thousands of shares. I didn't even have to comment. The court of public opinion ruled without me. Meanwhile, I had already started talks with 2 of our former investors. Not about coming back, but about licensing the core platform directly from me. Clean. Independent. Transparent. They agreed. We inked a deal that valued my original IP portfolio at nearly $8 million. They wanted to build something new, with me as the sole founder. I said yes. But that wasn't the end. What most people didn't know was that in addition to the IP, I also held a 15% silent share in the holding company Dad and Evan created when they thought they'd phased me out. They didn't dissolve the old LLC. I guess they thought it'd be useful someday, or they were too arrogant to consider I'd make it matter again. I activated it. I called for a vote to dissolve the firm, citing financial misrepresentation and breach of contract with shareholders. My vote tipped the scale. The board fractured. Legal suits followed. And within 6 months, the business collapsed under its own weight, torn between lawsuits, frozen assets, and lost credibility. Dad called once? No voicemail. Just a missed call. Evan tried to DM me months later. Said he understood now. That he was just doing what Dad told him. That he wished we could go back. I didn't respond. Because here's what people never tell you about betrayal: the first cut is emotional. But the healing is logistical. It's in every boundary you set, every document you sign, every piece of your power you reclaim. I didn't get revenge by screaming. I got it by writing contracts, documenting timelines, building something new while they still thought I was licking my wounds. And I did it while staying silent. People think the loudest one wins. But silence? Silence, wielded precisely, is the sharpest blade in the room. When my new company launched, We hosted a demo in the same hotel ballroom my father used to book for annual strategy retreats. I didn't mention them. I didn't need to. The room was full. Clients, partners, investors, people who knew my work. Not the work they said I did. The work I actually did. I walked on stage in a white suit. Not a speech, just a live demo. Show, don't tell. The platform ran seamlessly. The crowd applauded. And when the Q&A came, someone asked what I learned most from the last 3 years. I smiled. Keep your records. Know your worth. And never let someone use your name louder than you do. There was a long pause before the applause came again. Not thunderous, just solid. Sure. Like the foundation I stood on. Later that night, I walked past the glass building that once held our offices. The lights were out. The sign was still there, barely. I stopped, looked up, and for the first time, felt nothing. Not bitterness. Not grief. Just peace. They tried to build a kingdom on my shoulders and then cut me out of the throne room. But in the end, all they did was remind me that I was capable of building a kingdom of my own. From the ground up. And this time, there would be no smoke, no mirrors. Only truth. And my name, right where it belonged. The first Christmas after everything unraveled was quiet. No calls. No emails. No invitation. And for the first time in years, I wasn't holding my breath for any of it. There was no part of me left hoping to be welcomed back, no child still searching for approval. I didn't need a seat at their table anymore. I had built my own. The strange part was how normal it all began to feel. There was no dramatic victory parade, no poetic justice moment where they came begging for forgiveness. Life just moved forward. The courts processed the dissolution, the injunctions held, the damages were calculated and settled. Quiet settlements. Quiet closures. My new company, Luna Analytics, wasn't a splashy name, but it had weight. We weren't just building better systems, we were building ethical ones. The kind of tools that protected founders from what I'd gone through. We helped people trace their IP, verify ownership chains, and lock in protections before it was too late. Every founder I worked with, I looked them in the eye and said, "Don't leave anything to assumption." They didn't always understand what I meant, until they did. People asked me if I missed my family. At first, I said I didn't know. That was the safe answer. The polite one. But the truth? No. I didn't miss them. I missed who I thought they were. I missed the fantasy that hard work would be enough, that blood would be a shield instead of a weapon. But them, the real people? The ones who smiled to my face while signing my name off behind closed doors? No, I didn't miss them at all. Sometimes, silence is the only closure you need. I heard bits and pieces about what happened to Evan. He moved states, tried to start something new, but the credibility hit was too steep. Investors remembered his name, for the wrong reasons. Last I checked, he was consulting on someone else's project. No ownership. No spotlight. Just background noise. Dad stayed out of the public eye. Retired quietly. He gave an interview once, a brief puff piece where he called his past complicated. Said he learned a lot about trust and letting go. He never mentioned me. But he did say something that stuck with me. The best businesses aren't about who starts them. They're about who stays when it matters. I laughed when I read that. Because I stayed. I stayed through the building, the scaling, the sacrificing. I stayed long after they stopped seeing me. And when it finally mattered, when everything came crashing down, I was the only one standing. One afternoon, nearly a year after the final settlement, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. It was from my father. The writing was uneven, messier than I remembered. He talked about aging, about regret. He didn't apologize, not directly. But he said he hoped I was well. That he was proud of what I'd built. That he saw me on a panel once and recognized the conviction in my voice. There was a time when that sentence would have undone me. But now, It just felt like a footnote in a story that no longer belonged to him. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. But because I no longer needed anything from him. Not validation, not reconciliation, not even understanding. I'd spent too many years twisting myself into knots trying to earn something that should have been freely given. Now I understood something better. Peace doesn't come from winning an argument. It comes from walking away before you lose yourself. In my new office, there's a photo on the wall. It's not of me, or my old team, or even the courtroom victory. It's a picture of the original whiteboard from our basement, the first day I ever sat beside my dad and mapped out a prototype. The handwriting is mine. The initials at the bottom are his. I keep it there not to remember what we had, but to remember what I gave. I gave everything. And they used it. But I also took it back. Not with fire. Not with revenge. But with clarity. With strategy. With quiet. And that was the real win. Because when people ask me now what happened to the family business, I smile and say, it evolved. And when they ask who runs it now, I say, I do. No more co-founder title. No more shared ownership. Just me. Fully. Finally. Looking back now, with the dust long settled and the noise quieted, I realized this wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was a story about identity. About knowing who you are, even when the people closest to you try to redefine you for their own benefit. About standing your ground, not in anger, but in clarity. If I had to distill everything I went through into a single truth, it would be this. Just because someone gave you a seat at the table doesn't mean they ever intended to serve you. Sometimes, you're there as a placeholder. Sometimes, you're there as decoration. And sometimes, you're there because they know your presence makes them look better to the outside world. But none of that is the same as being valued. And being valued? That starts with you. When I was younger, I believed loyalty was the highest currency in any relationship, personal or professional. I thought that if you just worked hard enough, stayed long enough, forgave deeply enough, it would eventually be rewarded. That the people you gave everything to would one day look back and say, she mattered. But here's the hard truth no one likes to say out loud: some people don't care how much you give. They only care how much control they keep. That was the hardest lesson of all. I watched my own father, someone I once idolized, smile in my face while undermining my position in silence. I watched my brother take shortcuts and still be handed power, while I was asked to be patient and trust the process. I learned painfully that proximity to power does not equal actual power. Titles are meaningless if they come without the authority or respect to back them up. But I also learned something else. Something even more valuable. You don't have to fight fire with fire. You can fight it with structure. With documentation. With strategy. With silence. There were so many moments when I wanted to explode. To scream. To out them publicly before I was ready. But I didn't. I waited. I gathered. I prepared. And when the moment came, I didn't just walk away. I walked out with every piece of my dignity, every legal document in my favor, and a business model that couldn't be taken from me again. And that taught me the most liberating truth of all. You are allowed to protect yourself. Even from family. Even from the people who raised you, praised you, and then used you. There is no badge of honor in being the one who stays loyal while you're being hollowed out from the inside. There is no glory in silence when it enables harm. And there is no shame in walking away from what no longer sees your worth. Forgiveness and boundaries are not the same thing. I can forgive the boy my brother used to be. I can even remember moments of pride and partnership with my father. But that doesn't mean I owe them access to the life I've built since. Some people are meant to be chapters. Not the whole story. And most importantly, your story doesn't end where someone else wants it to. If you feel erased, you write your name back in. If they try to silence you, you amplify your truth, not with noise but with purpose. If they underestimate you, let them. That's their mistake to make. And their regret to carry. Because what I learned, in the quiet aftermath of it all, is that revenge doesn't always wear armor or carry fire. Sometimes it wears calm. It walks slowly. It signs contracts. It builds something so steady that no storm can touch it. That's how I live now. Not in fear. Not in bitterness. But in clarity. I document everything. I protect my boundaries. I mentor women entering male-dominated industries. I remind them that they are allowed to take up space, not as tokens, not as figureheads, but as architects of their own legacy. Because if I've walked through fire, the least I can do is make sure the next person doesn't have to burn to be seen. So here's the lesson, the one I wish I had known sooner. Don't mistake being included for being respected. Don't confuse being useful with being valued. And never let someone else decide what your silence is worth. Because in the end, what they gave you can be taken away. But what you build on your own, that's yours forever.